habits get a bad rap, but there's some good habits to be had. And that's what we're talking about today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew, for the very first time in 2022 on the podcast. Welcome to a new year.
It feels good. 22's starting off okay, huh? Here on the fourth day of it.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't feel much different from 2021, if we're just being honest, but maybe that's because I have not fully deployed these new habits we're going to be talking about today on the podcast.
Yeah. I successfully wrote a check yesterday with the right date.
I wrote a proposal yesterday for somebody, and I was like, oh, make sure I update the date there, 2022. So that felt good. Habits, AJ, is one of the things we're going to be talking about, or it's the main topic. And I thought maybe a good way to sort of frame this up is thinking about medicine. So if you've ever met a doctor and gone to a doctor's office, they'll call that their practice, or they'll say that they're practicing medicine, which, is just one of those things that we just take for granted. But if you think about it, it's kind of a frightening thought, right? That you're coming into the hospital, doubled over in pain. Maybe you have appendicitis. Maybe you don't know what it is. And now you're going to encounter someone who is practicing medicine, right?
Yeah.
That's not the most comforting thought, right?
Yeah. If you stop and think about it, we would pursue an expert, not someone practicing.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
But the reason why they say this, and if you talk to a physician, they'll say this, that the true key to becoming a master or an expert in medicine is to always take the attitude that you're practicing. That there's always something more to learn, something that I don't know, or just our collective understanding of the human body and of medicine and of physiology and all of this. It's ever deepening. We're learning more and more every day. And so there's no moment in time where you go, that's it, I'm the master now.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to apply that same attitude towards leadership in our churches. I think that I've met guys, I'm sure you have too, who maybe want to come across as though they somehow crossed some imaginary line. They became the master leader and they can put that on their shelf like a trophy and they're done now. They're going to continue to just be what they are. But I don't think that that's how we ought to approach leadership in the church. Do you?
No, not at all. We've got to be practicing, So I'm still thinking about your doctor thing. If we went up to a retired doctor and said, can you help me? Hurts when I do this. He would say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I stopped practicing. And we don't want leaders who have stopped practicing. We don't want to go up to somebody and, hey, would you help the team? We don't want them to go, I stopped practicing leadership.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I'm done with that.
Just like in practicing when it comes to sports, which I know nothing about because I've never been very good at sports, or certainly with practicing medicine, when it comes to practicing leadership, you can develop some habits that help you practice better. And so what we're talking about today are 5 habits of high impact leaders. These are habits that high impact leaders use to that they leverage to help them practice becoming a better and better leader. And so these are adapted, I should say, modified, inspired by, they're not directly from, but I want to give credit on the front end of this podcast to kind of a classic leadership book, Kouzes and Posner, The Leadership Challenge. So Link for that is in the show notes if you're interested. Again, this is not a direct take from them, but sort of an inspiration from the book. But want to give them a little hat tip for their inspiring the habits that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, well, cool. Let's jump into our first habit, and that is to embody the values of and this point is kind of left at that. Embody the values. The values of what? Well, certainly your personal values, the values of your organization or your team, the values that you want to be, shown on display. So certainly this needs to start off on a personal level. So, good leaders, known good leaders, have strong and virtuous personal values that they live out. And then any good team will have, or any good leadership team will have done values exploration for themselves and, have kind of drawn some lines in the sand to identify what they value. But leaders of organizations and families need to embody those values themselves. This is, the whole modeling effect for others. The non hypocritical way of living, that way that people would say, yeah, that's how they are through and through. And so this could be an oversight by some leaders that they reach a position in which they feel like they can kind of get away with some things, or maybe just be one way and speak a different way. Right, Scott?
Yeah. And, I think that I want to be transparent and just go, I don't know that I always embody the values that I want to value. I know that I don't always embody the values.
No one's perfect. Don't beat yourself up.
Well, I'm not, but I do think that if we're talking about developing a habit, if we want to practice good leadership, we need to develop some habits, and that habit of self-reflection, even to go, am I really embodying the values?
Yeah.
I don't think that you can just assume that you are. In the article I talk about how just because you're married doesn't make you a good spouse. Just because you have kids doesn't make you a good parent. And I think that sometimes we can think, well, just by virtue of the fact that I am the pastor, then I am embodying the values. Mm-hmm. And that's not an assumption that you can make. I think you really have to look at your behavior and go, am I doing this? And when you have moments or seasons where you aren't embodying the values, I think that we have to take that on the chin and repent a bit and choose to embody the values. And so that's a habit that every good leader, every high impact leader has the habit of embodying the values that they want to see in others. You cannot expect others to emulate or reflect values that you yourself are not living out.
Yeah.
And so you have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Certainly have worked with churches, with leaders on their strategic leadership team, and sometimes some even pastors who they verbalize, wanting to make change and to move forward and to do well. But then, really, I don't think they even are thinking about what they're saying. They would, just clearly verbalize that. Well, that's not something I'm going to do. I'm not, some key component, not wanting to take on another task or lead a team. And they just think that's okay and normal. Like, I'm not going to be doing that, but I'm going to support it.
I don't want to get stuck on this point, but how many pastors bemoan the fact that their churches aren't very evangelistic, but they never share their faith.
Yeah, that's
or they say, oh man, no one in our church is really connected in community, but they themselves aren't connected in community.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like it's a magic button. Mm-hmm. And if all of a sudden you start sharing your faith, then everyone will. But there is some correlation here. And if you aren't doing it, you really can't expect other people to do it either.
Yeah, right. That's a good one. That's a good one to start off with. All right. Our second one is to enlist others in vision building. And these are not like cumulative points either. These are all standalone points. And all may apply to to you, some may apply to you. But vision building in an organization, I mean, it's one of the key elements that we work with churches on, because it's extremely important for the future growth and health of the church. But enlisting others in the vision building process, and then, sort of vision expansion and vision, living out the vision is a key element as leaders for us to draw people in to the vision experience and to participate in bringing it out to everybody. And Scott, I actually really like this anecdote. I'm not a Disney guy like you are, but I love this anecdote. Tell us about your most recent trip to Disney.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, let me start by saying, a good leader has an inspiring vision that generates some buy-in, but the best leaders have an inspiring vision that builds ownership, so that people kind of catch what the vision is, begin to own it for themselves, and begin to build it out in their own sphere of influence. So, the vision of Disney, at least on some level, I'm sure that Disney has its critics and I have my own criticisms, but at a fundamental level, they have this vision of being magical and whimsical and fun, and creating these memorable moments, magical moments for families, particularly as it relates to their parks and so on. So one of the fun things about Disney parks is finding hidden Mickeys around the parks and the resorts and the attractions. There's thousands of them. You can find them everywhere, really, if you're looking. And we were at Disney over the holidays, and we met up with some family friends of ours who were there at the same time as well. And they said, "Oh, we have to show you this hidden Mickey. It's the craziest hidden Mickey, right?" So we're like, "Okay, great." So we're sort of outside the Enchanted Tiki Room. If you've been to Magic Kingdom, you'll know it's sort of next to Aladdin's Flying Carpets ride is right there as well. And around that area, they've got some jewelry that's just embedded in the concrete, like random jewel, random coin, because it's supposed to be like Aladdin, like spilling jewels and things into the concrete. So they pull us, they kind of guide us to where we need to go, and we're looking down in the concrete, and there, sure enough, now it's so easy to miss, AJ, but just tiny little earrings, I believe, just of Mickey Mouse earrings. And how many thousands of people, millions of people a year just walk right on over that hidden Mickey? They just never see it. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't know it was there. But and no chief executive sitting in some office in Anaheim ever told this Imagineer, "Hey, put a hidden Mickey in the concrete right outside the Enchanted Tiki Room." Someone who worked there understood the assignment. They caught the vision. They understood what it is to be an Imagineer and what it is to work for Disney and to create these hidden magical moments, and they put them there. They owned that vision in a way that some person sitting in an office never could have realized, never would have dreamt up. And when it comes to leadership in your church and enlisting others in vision building, it very much works like this, AJ, where you might be an architect or even the chief architect of a vision, but if you're really enlisting others, they're going to be building that out in ways you couldn't possibly have imagined. And that makes it so much more rich, so much deeper, so much more beautiful than if it's all just your idea. So if you have this bad habit, AJ, of everything has to be my idea, you're going to miss out on some truly magical things in your church.
That's a great one. I just don't know if I really have anything to add to that, because I think that just really illustrates well launching a powerful vision. It also illustrates the necessity of communicating it well down line. No matter how big your church is, if you're not communicating the essence of the vision to people that you work with, you're never going to get the results of the hidden Mickey earrings in some concrete in an obscure sidewalk. So, I think this is just really great. I love vision. talk and development. And I think this is a really great point. So bring others into the vision. And maybe some side facets of this as well is the initial vision development. I mean, when we work with churches, we don't think vision development is like one person locks himself in a room and they come out with a vision. We have a team of leaders together, and they'll contribute in various ways, right. Some more than others, and based on their own personal, life experiences and ideas. Vision comes together in a team environment, and then different people, depending on their position, will project that out and move it forward. But everybody, if it's communicated well, will find their piece of the vision. They'll find how they
find their section of the sidewalk.
That's right. And that'll be their fingerprint in the vision, and everybody can celebrate it and point to it. So that's right. Great one. Love this one. All right. Our next one is, and we did an episode last year also on risk taking. I don't think that was our main topic, but I know we've talked about this before. But our next point is
maybe Molly can find it. We ask her.
Molly's good. Yeah. Shout out to Molly, the person that really makes
this podcast happen.
Yeah. Our third point is experiment and take risks. And this one to me kind of stands out as an element that could become a habit, that it's has a strong likelihood of, and even when I'm thinking about the word habit here, Scott, I'm really thinking about, well, I don't know, I guess even it could get into values in culture, a culture of experimentation and risk taking, which might sound bad on the front end, but a church that is always trying to innovate and try out something new. I attended a church for a long time, and I always described them to leadership teams as a church that it had a culture of change in it. I don't think anybody in the church ever necessarily, or at least in any large group or volume, vocalized opposition. We were so used to our leadership trying something new and always clearly pointing to why, if that works, it's going to be really cool, that it was fine. You could show up on any Sunday and nothing would necessarily surprise you to an offensive position. It'd be like, oh, we've never done it like that. It was just like, okay, it's different because things are always changing. I think that kind of is what we're getting at here. Become a church whose culture is one of taking risks for the kingdom, putting something out there. Let's not be stationary. Let's not attempt to be stationary or static. Let's attempt to always be in motion. Yeah. And I think that's a really great habit to form.
This is a habit that begins with accepting a pre-existing reality, which is that change happens. Regardless of your attitude towards it, change happens.
Yeah.
So my hair, if you're watching on YouTube, shout out to YouTube. You can subscribe there and see our faces. But if you've watched, yeah, my hair has been cut recently, and I've got more gray. The bottom of my sideburns, at one point I was shaving and I thought, are my sideburns shorter? And then I looked closer and I'm like, no, they're just white. They're just, you just can't see them. So a change happens. Oh yeah, you're getting it too, man. Although you're older than me, so you should.
I know. Pretty soon we're going to look the same age.
Yeah, which is terrible for me. Anyway, at any rate, so you have to start with the pre-existing reality, which is that change is inevitable. And so you've probably heard me say this on the podcast, and I say to churches all the time, but change is inevitable. Therefore, you can either have a voice in change or you can be a victim of it. And so if you accept the reality of change, that things are constantly changing, then should give you permission then to play with it a little bit and engage with it and have a voice in it. I've also mentioned, I believe I've said it on the podcast before, heard Larry Osborne speak several years ago. And he said that churches have a bad habit, speaking of habits, of fully committing to every change they try. So before they try any change, or they really think about it, and then they make up, they invest money in signage, and they promote it big, and they put it in the budget, and then they implement the change. And then sometimes sometimes the changes you implement don't work. Mm-hmm. And if you've put so much into a change and then it doesn't work, that's when churches are like, gosh, I don't know that I want to engage with this change, right? Because the last time we did it, we put so much in it and it didn't work. The reality is a certain percentage of your ideas, and maybe even a high percentage of them, aren't going to work. So Osborne's advice was to beta test everything. You should always be trying something new, but try it in a low risk environment. Try it in some sort of smaller atmosphere. Something that requires something bigger. Tell people, hey, we're just trying this out. We're going to try this for 90 days. If it doesn't work out, we're not going to do it anymore. Like, be upfront about it. Sounds like, AJ, at your previous church where you attended, was that kind of attitude? Like, this is just something we're trying. Yeah. And the stakes were low, but the opportunity was high, right?
Yeah. Just thinking about, churches that we've worked with that have been static for a long time, static in quotes, because again, that's a false
delusion
term, actually. Yeah. But man, just thinking about churches that are always in motion versus those that attempt to be static, there's just a different feeling on them in them. And there's just a different level of interest and excitement and anticipation. So this is a great habit to build into your church. And now what we don't want you to think is, we don't want to see your church, I'm kind of thinking about a rubber ball, that's every bounce, different height, different direction. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about calculated risks in alignment with your mission and vision and values.
Yeah, intentional innovations.
Exactly. Yes. Towards very specific goals, not just spitballing.
Let's do this. Let's do it. Yeah, right. I'll say this to wrap up this habit of experimenting and taking risk, is that the gates of hell will not prevail against a church that's on the move, but the gates of hell have no fear of a church that fails to move. And so you've got to build a habit of innovation and experimentation and risk-taking, especially if that is intentional and towards a clear vision.
Did you just make that up?
I did write it in the article.
All right.
But I thought of it when I wrote the article.
Hey, man, good job. Wow. That's a good one. Somebody tweet that.
Tweet it.
Don't worry, Scott will. Then you can share it.
Oh, no, I won't.
All right. Our number 4, empower your team. And this fits in perfectly with the last couple points that we're talking about, because unless you're truly empowering your team to work with you towards achieving some of these things, you will be actively working against yourself. If you have great vision and ideas that you want to try, and you think it all needs to be you, or maybe if you don't even intentionally think that, but that's how you've been operating, you are holding yourself back.
Yeah, you're so right. If everything depends on you, then that's a problem. And I do think that sometimes this happens because you got a solo pastor situation, or, a pastor who is bivocational or something like that. And so you feel like, oh, well, everything hinges on me.
Yeah.
But that's you've created that environment, or you've sustained it. Maybe you didn't start it, but you're sustaining. At some point you have to pull the plug on that and go, it can't all hinge on me. Even if you're a part-time solo pastor in a small church, there are other people there. And so you have to build a team. So I kind of mentioned in the article, there are, I think, 3 things that empowering the habit of empowering a team. They're almost like these 3 sub habits or requisites, just briefly. The first one is you have to have a team. So if You can't empower a team that doesn't exist. So if you don't have a good team of folks around you, you need to recruit one. Or if you have hirelings, that's not a team. Just because you might be in a larger church that's got a lot of staff, that doesn't make them a team. You have to really consider them a team and elevate them and give them positions where they can actually act. The second one, AJ, is trust. You have to, does you no good to be surrounded by people that you don't actually trust. And if you don't trust them, you have to ask yourself, why? Why don't I trust them? Is it my own insecurity, or are they not qualified? I've told churches before, if you wouldn't trust your pastor with $1 million project, overseeing it, not executing every piece, but just overseeing it. If you would not trust them to oversee $1 million project, you probably shouldn't hire them. Why are they on your team? Why wouldn't you trust them with that? Is it because they don't have the experience? Okay, maybe we can deal with that. Is it because you think they might mismanage something? Well, that's a red flag. And if you go, well, $1 million is a lot of money. People's eternities are significant. They're worth more than $1 million, right? Yeah. And so if you wouldn't trust them with $1 million project, you probably shouldn't put them in the senior leadership position in your church. And then finally, in terms of empowerment, it hinges on maximizing the skill set of people. So you've really got to be investing in developing those leaders. You can't really fully trust them. They're not going to be able to be empowered to the fullest degree if they're underdeveloped, if they have skills that haven't been maximized. So you really got to be developing them.
Yeah.
I just was talking a lot. Sorry.
Quick little note. I want to speak to the small church pastor, maybe that bivocational or just that solo pastor in the small church. And maybe you're in that church that we've kind of been, mentioning, that static church. If you feel like there just aren't any leaders in your church, there might very well be dormant leaders that, because of a lack of involvement that they've been asked to come into or asked to participate in building, you may have leaders that have gone into dormancy. And I think that happens, that until you begin to look for clues that you might have some people with some qualities that would be great in leadership. And then actually, maybe even if you don't have projects or things that you want to change that would need more leaders, if you'll start looking for people like that and ask them, sometimes people are just waiting to be asked. That might take you, the hardest thing to move or to grow is from 1 to 2. A single person, a small business, some guy officing out of his house. You never again will attempt to double the size of your organization in one fell swoop. Going from 1 to 2 is the hardest move. And if you're that solo pastor, going from just you to somebody that'll work on something with you is the hardest move you'll ever make. It's always hard, but it'll get easier from there. So if you're just listening to us today and you're like, man, there's nobody in my church, there is. Put in that effort. It's work, but just want to encourage you with that today. There are people. You'll find them if you're looking.
Absolutely. All right. Our last habit. So, is a simple one, but an important one, and it's to celebrate others. Good leadership is not just about sort of the nuts and bolts of getting things done. And we talk about this quite a bit, but being a church leader, especially, it's not just about the strategic, it's about the spiritual. In fact, it's about the spiritual, number one, and the strategic, number two. And there's an interplay between those two things. And sometimes I think there's an underemphasis on the strategic aspect of being a pastor. But it's worth remembering that the Savior told us that our job is to feed the sheep. And so feeding the sheep involves encouraging others, celebrating their wins, and acknowledging the hard work of people around you. Your team is only as effective as the quality of their morale. And I think sometimes church leadership leans into that quip, the beatings will continue until the morale improves. And it really ought not be that way. It ought to be a joy to be on a church leadership team. And I've been in a lot of board meetings, AJ, and I'm sure you have too, but where no one seems particularly happy to be on that board. Mm-hmm. And it ought not be that way. It really ought to be a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. This should be, I think, leaders with a right focus. This is almost, this is like the reward that they strive for, is to be in a position to celebrate others. I think some of the greatest leaders that you might have worked under, or even in the public eye, are those who look forward to the opportunity to celebrate their team. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that's something I think about, even growing our ministry organization here at the Malfers Group. I mean, I envision a time with, you know, an ever expanding team that get to point to for how great they're doing. And so, in fact, Scott, well, let me just take a second and just tell you how much I appreciate you.
Oh, please
celebrate
don't.
The awesome stuff, including this article. But, you know, I mean, I think that's what we should look for. I think we should strive for the opportunity to celebrate our team as leaders. And so I you know, think about that. Take a few minutes, think about that when you're done listening to the Church Revitalization podcast, about how you can celebrate people on your team for the great contributions that they're making every day.
Totally. Let me just very briefly recap. We've had 5 habits that, hey, if you want to practice leadership well, become a high impact leader, these are 5 habits that you can develop, that you can work on. And as we start a new year, it's a great time to be thinking about, what are my leadership habits, and how could I improve them? So here are the 5 very briefly. Number 1, embody the values. You cannot expect that your organization to reflect the values that you fail to embody yourself. So be sure that you embody the values that you want to see in your church. And this applies at home. I think I'm thinking about that for myself, like the things I want to see in my kids and in my wife. You know, am I living them out? And I think I've got to do better about that. So that's true at home. It's true in church. Number 2, enlist others in vision building. If everything has to be your idea, your vision is always going to be less than what it could be. If you enlist others in vision building, you're going to find yourself with a richer, deeper vision that is owned by a community of people who can continue to live it out long past your timeline. Number 3, experiment and take risks. Accept the reality that change is inevitable. It is. It's happening. So you can either lean in and have a voice in it, or be a victim of change. And I think the former is better than the latter. And God promises that the gates of hell cannot prevail against his church. Therefore, lean in, go on offense, take some risks. Number 4, empower your team. This is tied to the enlisting others in vision building, but it's deeper than that. You really need to trust people to act, to make decisions, to do things. And if it all revolves around you and you have to do everything and you're having to micromanage every decision, it's just not going to work. It's not sustainable for you or the church. So build the habit of empowering others, which, by the way, carries some risk. People are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. You can work through that. But high impact leaders have the habit of empowering the people around them. And then finally, celebrate others and encourage others. And remember that your job, chief job, is as a shepherd, an under shepherd, under the great shepherd, the good shepherd. And so understand that you've got to celebrate others, encourage their hearts, lead them spiritually, feed the sheep. And the success of your church ultimately hinges on whether or not people are with you and want to be led by you as you are being led by Christ. And that requires encouragement. So those are the 5 habits. Again, shout out to Leadership Challenge as sort of a starting point for the inspiration of this article. I want to be sure I give credit to them, and links to their book are in this article, which you can find where, AJ?
You can go over to malfersgroup.com/121 to read today's article and the link that Scott just mentioned. And this has been episode 121 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We would love to hear from you. If you think it's finally time to have someone come alongside you in helping your church get healthy, then certainly come visit us at malfersgroup.com. One of our strategic envisioning guides would love to talk with you about how we could make a really positive change for you. And we're glad that you're with us this week. We'll see you again next time on the Church Revitalization Podcast.